The church was full. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the flowers, not the casket, not the light coming through the stained glass the way Evan always said it did on Sunday mornings. The people, row after row of them, filling every pew, spilling into the vestibule, standing 3 deep along the side walls. 41 years, that man moved through this world quietly, and half of Charlotte showed up to say goodbye. I sat in the front pew and did not move. My name is Trevelle Dupree. I was Evan's wife for 41 years. And on the morning we buried him, I was the only person in that building who was not performing. Brennan was at the door. My son, tall, pressed suit, Evan's jawline, none of Evan's stillness. He greeted every person who walked in with a handshake and a half smile, the practiced warmth of a man who had already mentally moved on to the next item on the agenda. Kamara stood beside him in a black dress that fit too well for grief, her hand finding his arm at precise intervals, the two of them working that entrance the way people work a room when there is something to gain from being seen. I watched all of it from the pew and said nothing. That has always been my way. The service was beautiful. The repast was held at the house afterward, our house, the one on Keswick Drive that Evan and I had filled with 40 years of living. People brought food and stories and the particular tenderness reserved for widows, and I received all of it with a steady hand and a face that gave nothing away. Midway through the afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I heard Kamara's voice drop. That specific drop. The one that means the conversation just became something it was not supposed to be overheard. I did not move toward it. I stayed at the counter with my hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold, and I listened. I could not hear the words, only the tone, low, deliberate, with an urgency underneath it that had nothing to do with grief. Brennan answered in the same register, a decision being confirmed, not discussed. When Brennan came back into the main room, he had his phone in his hand. He stepped toward the back door, and I caught one word before it closed behind him. Listing. I turned back to my cold tea. I did not know what to do with that word yet, so I filed it away the way I had learned to file things across 41 years of marriage, quietly, carefully, in a place I could find it again. By 9 o'clock, the house was empty. I moved through the rooms, turning off lights, the way I had done 10,000 times before, except this time there was no Evan reading in the study, no sound from the back of the house to orient myself by. Just silence, and the particular weight of a home that knows something has changed. I sat on the edge of the bed. Evan's side was untouched. I had not been able to look at it directly since Tuesday, and I could not look at it now. If you are watching this and you have ever loved someone the way I loved Evan Dupree, drop the time in the comments. I want to know who is sitting with me tonight. The will reading was scheduled for 9 the following morning. I lay down without undressing. I did not sleep. I kept thinking about something Evan said to me 2 years before he got sick. Sitting at the kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday, unprompted, the way he sometimes said the most significant things. He told me he had taken care of everything. I did not ask what that meant. I trusted him the way I had always trusted him, completely and without condition. Lying there in the dark, I wished I had asked. The attorney's office was on the 4th floor of a building on South Tryon Street. Small room, round table, 4 chairs. The kind of space designed to contain difficult moments without absorbing them. Brennan and Kamara were already seated when I arrived. Kamara had changed into something lighter than the day before, navy, structured, appropriate without being mournful. She had stopped performing grief. That told me everything about where we were now. The attorney was a measured man named Harold Greer. He did not offer condolences. He opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and began. Brennan received the Los Angeles Penthouse, Unit 14B, a building on Wilshire Boulevard. The estate valuation attached to the probate filing placed the property at just over $10 million. Harold read the address twice, once for the record, once because properties at that level require precision in transfer documentation. Kamara's hand moved under the table and found Brennan's. I watched her fingers close around his, and I kept my face exactly where it was. $10 million. My son sat across from me and received $10 million, and the only thing that moved on his face was the faintest loosening around his jaw. The private relief of a man who had been waiting for a number and finally heard it. Then Harold turned the page. He read my name. He read the name of the institution. Southern Piedmont Credit Union, Charlotte Branch. He read the account number. Then he paused briefly and adjusted the paperwork in front of him. He explained that estate records referenced a legacy passbook account Evan maintained separately for many years, along with related institutional documentation retained directly by the bank rather than inside the probate file itself. He said the account transferred to me outside the primary estate distribution process and would require direct verification through Southern Piedmont before any additional records could be reviewed formally. Then he reached into the folder and slid a small, worn passbook across the table toward me. That was all. The room did not make a sound. I reached out and picked up the passbook with both hands. It was lighter than I expected. Thin, the cover soft with age, the kind of object that has been handled carefully for a long time. I did not open it. I placed it in my bag. Brennan looked at it the way you look at something left on the side of the road. A glance, a quiet assessment, a dismissal. He did not say anything, but his silence had a shape to it. The specific shape of a man who believes he already knows what something is worth. Kamara straightened in her chair. Just slightly. The way a person adjusts when they feel the room has resolved in their favor. Harold closed the folder. The meeting was done in under 20 minutes. In the car, Brennan drove and I sat in the passenger seat watching Charlotte move past the window. We were on Providence Road when he spoke. He said the house would need to be sorted out in the coming weeks. He said it the way you say something you have already decided. Not a conversation, a notification. His eyes stayed on the road. I did not respond. I looked at the passing storefronts and the ordinary Tuesday morning happening outside the glass, and I held everything I was feeling in a place so deep inside myself that not one particle of it reached my face. He dropped me at Keswick Drive without coming inside. I stood in the kitchen for a long time before I sat down. The house was quiet in the specific way it had been quiet since Tuesday, not peaceful, but hollowed. I made no coffee. I did not turn on a light. I took the passbook out of my bag and set it on the table. I opened it. The numbers inside did not look like a normal savings account. The figures, the dates, the structure of the entries. None of it matched anything I recognized from the joint account Evan and I had kept for decades. Some of the deposits were quarterly. Some carried coded references beside them I did not understand. And beneath several entries were balances far larger than anything I would have expected sitting inside an old passbook account. I read it 3 times. I still could not make sense of what I was looking at, but something in my chest went very still. The particular stillness that comes not from understanding, but from the first suspicion that you are holding something you were meant to find. I heard the locksmith before I saw him. The sound came through the front door, metal on metal, the specific mechanical turning of a man doing a job he was paid to finish quickly. I was still in the clothes I had fallen asleep in. It was 8:43 in the morning. I came down the stairs and saw Kamara standing in the front hallway of the Eastover house. The property Brennan and Evan had purchased together years earlier, the one Brennan fully acquired after buying Evan's share before Evan died. After the funeral, Brennan insisted I stay there temporarily instead of Keswick Drive. He said the house on Keswick would be too painful for me alone so soon after Evan's death. At the time, it sounded thoughtful. I understood now for what it really was. Not comfort, positioning. Brennan was not there. Kamara was dressed, hair done, bag on her shoulder, the composed readiness of a woman who had been awake for hours. She looked at me coming down the stairs the way you look at something you have already accounted for inside a plan. She said the property needed to be secured and managed properly going forward. She said it without raising her voice, without visible cruelty, the flat efficiency of someone completing a scheduled task. Then she held out 2 large garbage bags. "My things," she said. She had packed them herself. I stood at the bottom of those stairs and looked at those bags and made a decision in that moment that I have kept every day since. I was not going to give her the sound of my voice breaking. I was not going to give her anything she could carry back to Brennan as a story. I took the bags. I walked to the car. The morning air was cool. I sat in the driver's seat with both bags on the back seat and did not move for a moment. Behind me, the locksmith was still working. New deadbolt, front lock, side entry. I did not look back. I called Roselle. I did not explain. I did not have the architecture for explanation yet. I said her name and she said she was coming, and that was the entire conversation. She arrived in 40 minutes. She pulled up behind me, got out, opened my passenger door, and said nothing. She did not ask what happened. She did not make a sound that required me to respond to it. She simply drove me to her house and made food I did not eat and kept the television off. That evening at her kitchen table, she asked to see the passbook. I slid it across to her. She opened it, read the entries slowly, the way she reads everything, with her whole attention. She turned it over, examined the account stamps. Then she opened it again from the back, and I watched her go still. She looked up at me. "Go to the bank," she said. Her voice was quiet and certain in a way that moved through me differently than anything else had in 4 days. Not emotional, not urgent, certain. The way Roselle says things when she already knows something I have not caught up to yet. I asked her what she saw. She tapped one of the coded quarterly entries with her finger. "That is not a normal savings account structure," she said. "My brother worked commercial lending 20 years. I have seen legacy business-linked accounts before." That was all she said. I took the passbook to bed with me that night. I lay in Roselle's guest room with it on the nightstand. The ceiling above me unfamiliar. The silence, the wrong shape. I thought about Evan. About the way he had handed me things across 41 years. Grocery lists, insurance cards, birthday cards, always with a quiet deliberateness, like everything he gave me meant more than it appeared to. I did not understand why he had chosen this. I was too hollowed out to ask the question properly, but I did not put the passbook down. Roselle put coffee in front of me the next morning and sat down across the table like she had something to say and had already decided how she was going to say it. "I want you to go to the bank today," she said. I told her I would go next week. My voice came out flatter than I intended. Not rude, just empty. I was 3 days out of a house I had been removed from with 2 garbage bags, and I was still wearing grief like a second skin, and she was talking to me about a bank account. Roselle looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "You will go tomorrow." Not a suggestion, a correction. She wrapped both hands around her mug and leaned forward slightly. She did not argue with my grief. She did not tell me Evan would have wanted me to be strong or any of the things people say when they want someone to move faster than they are able. She argued with what she knew. She said, Travell, who handled every piece of paper that came into your house. I did not answer because we both already knew. Evan handled everything. Taxes, insurance, utility accounts, renewals, bank mail, filing deadlines, every envelope that arrived needing a response. For 41 years, I trusted him with all of it because that was the architecture of our marriage. His domain, my trust. Total and unquestioned. I ran the home. He ran everything attached to it on paper. It was not a power arrangement. It was simply how we worked. Roselle said, a man who opened every document, managed every account, and reviewed every statement for 40 years. If he did not want something noticed before the right time, it would not be noticed. And if Evan Dupree kept something quiet, it was not accidental. Something in that landed differently than anything else had since the funeral. Not comfort. Precision. The kind of thing that does not soften a situation, but clarifies it. Evan's silence about the passbook was not neglect. It was intention. And Evan's intentions, in 41 years, had never once been careless. I told her I would go tomorrow. Roselle nodded once and reached across the table. She had the passbook in front of her, turning it over in her hands the way she does with things she is still solving. Then she opened the inside back cover and turned it toward me. There, in the bottom corner, in Evan's handwriting. Small, deliberate, the particular slant I would recognize anywhere. If anything happens to me, find Fletcher Maud. Nothing else. No number. No explanation. Just the sentence written in dark ink that had not faded, which meant it had not been written years ago. Evan had added it intentionally in a place someone would only discover if they examined the passbook carefully. I stared at it. I turned the name over in my mind, the way you turn over something unfamiliar, testing its edges. Fletcher Maud. I had been married to Evan Dupree for 41 years and had never heard that name once. I looked up at Roselle. I don't know who that is, I said. She was already nodding slowly, the way she nods when she is 3 steps ahead of a conversation. Maybe not, she said. But Charlotte is old enough that somebody does. She took another sip of coffee. Then she added quietly, men like Evan usually leave important things with people who understand silence. The room went still after that. I looked back down at the handwriting. Not rushed, not panicked. Calm, controlled. Written by a man who believed there would eventually come a day when I would need to follow instructions he could no longer give me himself. And somehow, that realization unsettled me more than the passbook had. I went alone. Roselle offered to come, and I told her no. Whatever was in that passbook, I wanted to receive it standing on my own feet, in my own silence, without anyone else's reaction in my peripheral vision telling me how to feel about it. Southern Piedmont Credit Union on Independence Boulevard was quiet at 9 in the morning. A teller at the far window. A security guard by the door who nodded when I entered. I asked for the branch manager and took a seat. Gerald Sutton came out from the back office 3 minutes later. Mid-50s. Measured in his movements, the kind of man who has delivered enough difficult news across a desk that very little rearranges his face anymore. He shook my hand, said his name, and led me to his office without asking what I needed. Something about the way I was holding that passbook told him this was not a routine visit. He sat. I sat. I slid the passbook across the desk. He picked it up and noted the opening date on the front, 1989, with a brief acknowledgement that legacy passbook accounts from that era were uncommon, but still maintained for certain long-term members. Then, his attention sharpened slightly. He asked for my identification. I handed him my license. He compared the name carefully against the account records on his screen, then asked me to sign a verification form authorizing access to linked archival documentation. Only after that did he begin opening the records attached to the account. I watched his face. His hands stayed steady on the keyboard. His posture barely shifted. But somewhere between one breath and the next, Gerald Sutton became more careful. He read whatever was on the screen. Then he read it again. He asked me to wait a moment. He stepped quietly into the back office carrying the passbook with him. Through the glass partition, I could see him reviewing digital archive files with another employee seated further inside. No panic, no visible alarm, just the measured caution of people verifying something old and significant before saying the wrong thing aloud. He returned less than 2 minutes later, carrying a thin folder I suspected had not been opened in years. He sat down carefully and folded his hands. Mrs. Dupree. He said my name, the way people say a name when they need your full attention before they continue. Do you have any understanding of what this account was established for? I told him no. He nodded once, like that answer confirmed something for him. Then he turned the monitor, slightly toward me. Not enough to expose the full records, just enough for me to see the balance attached to the account. That was the first thing I saw. I read the number once, then again. The number did not change. I kept my hands flat on my thighs, and I kept my face where it was, and I breathed the way Evan used to tell me to breathe when something was larger than I was ready for. Slowly, through the nose, all the way down. Gerald gave me a moment. Then he said, Mrs. Dupree, the balance is actually the smaller part of what concerns me here. He opened the thin folder beside him. He explained that the account was connected to a registered North Carolina company. The company had been receiving structured quarterly deposits for over 30 years through a legally recorded participation agreement attached to a commercial property group in Los Angeles. Not random deposits, not investment fluctuations. Contractual distributions, scheduled, continuous. I sat with that. A company. Evan had attached this account to a company. And for 30 years, while I cooked and prayed and raised a son and buried a husband, something had been moving quietly in the background, building itself in silence. Gerald looked at me steadily. He said the company held a long-recorded participation interest connected to a commercial property structure on Wilshire Boulevard. Then he paused carefully before continuing. Mrs. Dupree, he said, I strongly recommend you speak with an attorney before anyone else becomes aware you came here today. I was already sitting, but I understood exactly what he meant. Gerald did not rush. He pulled a second chair around beside his desk. Not to sit in, but so I could see the screen clearly from where I was. That small adjustment told me this was going to take longer than I had prepared for. He said, Mrs. Dupree, in 1989, your husband incorporated a limited liability company in the state of North Carolina. According to the original filings and annual renewals, the sole registered member of that company is you. I heard the words. I let them settle. He continued carefully. The original incorporation documents required my signature, and according to the archived records, I had signed them. Gerald explained that Evan had likely presented the paperwork as standard financial planning or liability structuring. Routine administrative filings common during the late 80s, when many small family-held companies were organized for tax and asset purposes. I remembered signing things. Not frequently. 2 or 3 occasions early in our marriage. Thick packets placed beside my coffee while Evan explained them in the broad, simplified language he used whenever he handled paperwork he believed did not require my worry. I signed because that was how our marriage worked. He handled paper. I handled life around it. Gerald was careful not to frame it as deception, just fact. Evan was precise. I was trusting. Both things were true at the same time. Then Gerald explained something else. The company had never operated publicly under our home address. Corporate mail, annual filings, and registered records had been routed for years through a commercial records custodian and business mailing service connected to the company. According to the archived records, Evan personally handled all renewals, tax correspondence, and reporting requirements tied to the structure. That was why nothing had ever surfaced accidentally inside our daily life. The company was called Dupree Holdings, LLC. In 1991, Dupree Holdings entered into a recorded participation agreement connected to a commercial property structure on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. Gerald explained it slowly, simplifying where he could. The company did not own the building itself. It held a small but legally recorded participation interest tied to portions of the building's long-term operational revenue structure. An agreement attached to the property's title records through the Los Angeles County Recorder's Office. That recorded interest had remained attached through ownership changes, refinancing transactions, and inherited transfers for more than 3 decades. The penthouse on the 14th floor, Unit 14B, the one read aloud in Harold Greer's office 2 days earlier, the one Brennan inherited, existed inside that same property structure. For 30 years, Dupree Holdings had received quarterly distributions connected to that agreement, automatic, contractual, continuous. I had technically been the owner of a company since 1989. I did not know it for 35 years. Gerald let me sit with that. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary words. Outside his office, the credit union continued its quiet morning business, completely indifferent to what was being rearranged inside mine. Then he showed me the balance attached to the account. I did not speak. There was nothing equal to the number sitting on that screen. I thought about Evan at the kitchen table on ordinary mornings, reading the paper, asking if I wanted more coffee, carrying all of this quietly for decades, not hiding it from cruelty, protecting it the only way he knew how, by making sure nobody around me understood enough to threaten it. I asked one question. What does this mean for the penthouse? Gerald's hands came together on the desk. He said he was not an attorney and I needed one before I discussed the matter with anyone else. But what he could tell me, and he said this very carefully, was that recorded participation interests tied to a property's title structure do not disappear simply because ownership changes. They remain attached until formally resolved, negotiated, bought out, or legally extinguished. Whoever inherited that penthouse inherited it inside a property structure where Dupree Holdings already existed in the title history. Brennan had inherited a $10 million property. He had inherited it with my company's recorded interest already embedded inside the framework surrounding it. Gerald picked up a notepad. He wrote a number, not a name, just a number, and slid it across the desk. "Call that before the end of the week," he said. I folded the paper and put it in my bag beside the passbook. Then I stood. I thanked him. I walked out of Southern Piedmont Credit Union into the late morning air and stood on the pavement breathing like someone who had just stepped into a different version of her own life. Evan had taken care of everything. Now I was beginning to understand what that meant. Roselle found him in 48 hours, not through a directory, not through an advertisement, through her church network, which in Charlotte moves faster and reaches further than any search engine I have ever seen. 2 calls. A name passed from one trusted mouth to another. By Thursday morning, I had an appointment. Warwick Slade's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Trade Street. No reception area to speak of. A desk, 2 chairs, floor-to-ceiling shelves of organized files, and a window that looked out over the city without being distracted by it. The office of a man who had never needed to impress anyone who walked through his door. He was already seated when I came in. 60s, reading glasses on the desk beside him. The unhurried stillness of someone who measures everything before he speaks. He did not stand to greet me dramatically or tell me he was sorry for my loss. He gestured toward the chair across from him and waited for me to sit. He had already reviewed the material Gerald Sutton forwarded. I had called ahead and authorized the release myself that morning. Warwick looked at me over his glasses and asked 3 questions without preamble. How long were you married? 41 years, I said. Were you aware of signing any company documents during the marriage? I told him what I told Gerald, that Evan brought paperwork to me occasionally during the early years of our marriage, presented as routine financial planning and liability structuring. And I signed because financial administration belonged entirely to Evan's side of our life. He nodded once. Do you have the passbook with you? I placed it on the desk. He opened it, reviewed it for approximately a minute, closed it again, and set it aside. Then he leaned back and spoke to me directly, not gently, not with the softened language people use when they believe you cannot carry the full weight of a thing. He said, when your husband recorded Dupree Holdings' participation interest against that Wilshire property structure in 1991, it entered the title history at that point in time. Every sale, refinance, inheritance transfer, or ownership change that happened afterward occurred with that recorded interest already existing underneath it. He paused to let that settle. Your son inherited the penthouse, he said, but he inherited it inside a property structure that was never entirely free of Dupree Holdings' recorded participation rights. The room went very quiet. Warwick continued carefully. California property law governs the title chain because the asset sits in California. Your LLC exists under North Carolina law. That means this becomes a multi-jurisdiction property matter, which is why I will retain California Property Counsel immediately to confirm every recorded filing and coordinate directly with the title side there. He spoke the way experienced attorneys speak when they already understand where a matter is heading and are simply bringing you to it step by step. Then he said something that changed the air in the room. If your son attempts to sell that penthouse before this participation interest is formally resolved, the title review process will almost certainly flag it. Buyers, lenders, and title insurers do not like unresolved recorded interests attached to high-value property structures. Most transactions freeze until those issues are negotiated or cleared. He looked at me steadily. Mrs. Dupree, that gives you leverage, not ownership of his penthouse, not automatic control, leverage. The distinction mattered. Even I understood that. Outside on Trade Street, a car moved past, and then the silence returned. Warwick placed his glasses on and looked back down at the file. Then he said, I believe your son is already preparing to move that property quickly. I have seen this pattern before. Heirs inherit high-value assets and attempt liquidation before every layer of the title structure has been fully examined. He closed the folder carefully. Mrs. Dupree, he said, if we are going to protect your position, we need to move before escrow and title review advance too far. He looked at me directly. We have days, not weeks. Warwick did not wait. Within 72 hours of our meeting on Trade Street, he had retained California Licensed Property Counsel and submitted formal notice reaffirming Dupree Holdings LLC's recorded participation interest connected to the Wilshire property structure. The filing carried my signature as sole member of the company. It was precise, properly documented, and supported entirely by county records dating back to 1991. It did not attempt to create a new claim. It formally reaffirmed one that had already existed for more than 3 decades. I signed the documents at Roselle's kitchen table on a Friday evening. No ceremony. Just my name on a line Evan had quietly prepared for me 33 years earlier without ever telling me it existed. The buyer's escrow process continued for several days after that. Then the title review entered secondary legal examination. Less than 2 weeks later, the buyer's attorneys formally flagged the issue. The sale stopped moving. No courtroom, no confrontation, no dramatic phone call with raised voices. just a transaction suddenly unable to clear title review because a long-recorded participation interest tied to the property's structure required formal resolution before the insurer would approve closing. The buyer's counsel could not clear it immediately. Brennan's attorney could not bypass it. Everything paused. Warwick called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at Roselle's kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold beside me. He walked me through it carefully in plain language. Title review had identified Dupree Holdings' recorded interest during secondary examination. Escrow could not proceed until the matter was addressed formally, and the buyer's side had suspended closing while their attorneys evaluated exposure, lender concerns, and resolution options. I sat quietly through all of it. When he finished, I thanked him and ended the call. Roselle was watching me from across the table. She did not ask what he said. She had heard enough from my side of the conversation to understand. I looked down at the table for a moment. Then I said, Evan knew exactly what he was doing. Roselle said nothing. She picked up her mug. That was enough. That evening, Brennan called 3 times. I watched the phone light up on the nightstand, his name appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. I did not answer. There was nothing he could say in that moment that I needed to hear, and nothing I was prepared to give him. Kamara's message came at 9:17. 2 sentences. The first said I was making a serious mistake I did not fully understand. The second said she hoped we could resolve this privately as a family before attorneys complicated things further. The threat was in the first sentence. The calculation was in the second. She had written it carefully, the specific architecture of someone trying to sound reasonable while applying pressure at the same time. I read it once. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I turned off the light. I slept better than I had since the funeral. Not because anything was resolved, nothing was resolved. But because for the first time since the morning Kamara handed me those garbage bags in the Eastover driveway, the ground beneath me felt solid. Evan had built something underneath all of this, and it was holding exactly the way he designed it to hold. The phone lit up again at 7:40 the following morning. Warwick. I answered before the second ring. His tone was different this time, more measured. He told me Brennan had retained litigation counsel in both North Carolina and California. Preliminary legal filings had already begun. Brennan's position was that Evan Dupree may not have been fully competent during portions of the company's later administrative maintenance and reaffirmation process. His attorneys intended to challenge the authority behind some of the updated filings and seek deeper review of the documentation surrounding Dupree Holdings itself. I sat up straight in the bed. Not because the argument sounded strong, because Brennan had finally done the thing I knew Evan would never have forgiven. He was going after his father's mind. Roselle found him in 3 days. Same network. Same quiet chain of trusted names passed between people who had known each other long enough to be honest. Fletcher Maud lived outside Kannapolis in a neighborhood of older homes with deep front porches and mature trees that had been there longer than most of the residents. 40 minutes from Charlotte. I drove myself. He opened the door before I reached the top porch step. 78 years old, slight, with the careful stillness of a man who had been expecting something for a long time and made peace with waiting for it. He looked at me the way you look at someone you recognize from description rather than memory. Then he stepped back and held the door open. I wondered how long it would take, he said, not unkindly, just plainly. He made coffee. We sat at his kitchen table, smaller than Roselle's, the window above the sink looking out over a backyard gone quiet with late season. He did not rush me with questions. He let the silence settle naturally before either of us disturbed it. I asked him how he knew Evan. 30 years, he said. Started professionally. ended somewhere closer to family than business. He explained that he had served for years as the registered records custodian for several small companies. Evan structured during the 90s, handling document retention, annual compliance filings, and secure archival storage for sensitive records. Dupree Holdings had been one of them. Then he said, Evan was the most deliberate man he had ever known. Everything Evan did, he said, he did once and correctly. And he never explained himself until explanation became necessary. Then Fletcher folded his hands together on the table. Before I show you what's in that box, he said, there is something you need to understand first. 8 years earlier, Brennan approached Evan privately, not aggressively, not openly, quietly, the way Brennan handled things he did not want fully examined. Brennan asked questions about the estate structure, specifically the Los Angeles property, whether there were outside interests attached to it, whether the title carried any long-standing encumbrances or participation agreements that could complicate eventual transfer. I felt something move through my chest, cold, clarifying. Fletcher said Evan looked his son directly in the eye and told him the property was clean. No attached interests, no complications, nothing Brennan needed to concern himself with. Then Evan drove directly to Fletcher's house afterward, that same evening. He brought updated company copies, revised archival instructions, and the metal file box now sitting in Fletcher's hallway closet. And before he left, Evan said something Fletcher never forgot. When Travell comes for this, not if, when, you give it to her and nobody else. Fletcher said it quietly, without dramatic emphasis, because the weight was already inside the sentence. Your husband understood your son long before you did, Mrs. Dupree, and once he understood him, he built accordingly. The kitchen stayed quiet after that. Outside, a bird moved through the yard and disappeared into the trees. Fletcher stood and walked into the hallway. When he returned, he carried a metal file box, gray, locked, worn slightly at the edges from years of careful handling. Not neglected, maintained. He opened it with a small key attached to his keyring. Inside were decades of organization, company filings, recorded participation documents, tax correspondence, quarterly distribution records, certified copies from Los Angeles County, banking histories, archived letters between attorneys and management companies. Not chaos, architecture. Every page arranged with the precision of a man who understood documents mattered most. Years after people stopped remembering conversations, Fletcher rested one hand lightly on the files. Evan updated these every year himself, he said, even after he got sick. Then Fletcher reached into the bottom of the box and removed a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Evan's handwriting. Nothing else. No date, no explanation. Just my name in the hand I had read across 41 years of grocery lists, birthday cards, utility payments, and quiet, ordinary life. Fletcher slid it across the table. I picked it up, held it, then placed it carefully inside my bag. I thanked Fletcher. I drove back to Charlotte in the dark, and I did not open the envelope. Not yet. Roselle left for church at 8:15. I heard the front door close, heard her car back out of the driveway, and then the house was mine. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I sat down at the table and I took the envelope out of my bag and I placed it in front of me. I sat with it unopened for a few minutes. Not from fear, from the particular weight of knowing that whatever was inside had been written for this exact moment. Evan had written it knowing I would be sitting somewhere without him, holding something he could not hand to me in person. He had written it anyway. That was the most Evan thing I had ever known him to do. I opened it. 3 pages. His handwriting. Small, level, The same hand that had written grocery lists and birthday cards and signed every document that passed through our house for 41 years. No flourish. No wasted words. Evan on paper was exactly Evan in a room. He told me he registered the company in 1989 because he wanted me to have something that was entirely mine. Structured early. Structured cleanly. Before anything in our lives could complicate it or give anyone else a reason to look at it sideways. He told me he never told me because he knew me. He wrote, "If you had known what you owned, you would have mentioned it. Not carelessly, because you are not a careless woman, but because you are an honest one. You would have let it surface the way honest people let things surface, in conversation, in passing, without thinking twice about it. And Brennan would have heard. He has always listened for the things we did not intend for him." I stopped reading for a moment. I looked at the window above Roselle's sink. Then I kept going. He wrote, "The only way to keep something safe from a person who is always watching is to make sure the person holding it does not know they are holding it." 35 years of silence, not absence, not omission. Architecture. He told me Brennan came to him 8 years ago asking about the Los Angeles property. Asking specifically about encumbrances. He wrote it without anger, just the flat clarity of a man recording a fact. He told me he looked at his son and told him there was nothing attached to that property. He wrote, "I would tell him the same thing again today." Then he told me about Fletcher, that Fletcher had everything I would need and would give it to no one else, that I should trust Fletcher completely because Fletcher had kept his word across 30 years without being asked twice. Then he wrote a name I had already heard by then, Warwick Slade, Charlotte, Trade Street. He wrote that Warwick had a reputation that traveled through the right networks, and that if I needed him, Roselle's people would find him. He had not given me the name directly. He had placed it where it would arrive naturally, at the right time, through the right hands. Evan had planned even the path I would take to find help. The letter closed with one sentence: "Do not settle for less than 30 years." I read it twice. I understood what he meant. Not a number, not a negotiating position. 30 years was how long the company had been working on my behalf without my knowledge. He was telling me not to walk away from what had already been earned. I folded the pages. I put them back in the envelope. I held it for a moment with both hands. Then I picked up the phone and called Warwick. Warwick called on a Wednesday morning with the kind of measured tone he used when the information was significant, but the situation was stable. He told me Kamara had filed for divorce. He had received notice because Kamara's attorney contacted Brennan's attorney regarding the division of marital assets. And because Brennan's attorney was simultaneously managing the litigation surrounding Dupree Holdings and the frozen California transaction, Warwick had been copied on portions of the correspondence tied to the unresolved property dispute. He said it plainly, the way he said everything, no editorial, no pause for reaction. Just the facts assembled in the order they mattered. I listened without interrupting. The picture he assembled was clean and cold. Kamara had entered the marriage with a financial strategy that extended well beyond the wedding itself. The planned penthouse sale was not impulsive. She and Brennan had already been exploring reinvestment options months before Evan died. Discussions involving private development groups, short-term capital placement, and a luxury property acquisition in Arizona that required liquidity Brennan no longer had access to. Warwick also said there had been signs of strain between them for weeks before the divorce filing itself. Disagreements over legal spending, delays tied to the frozen sale, separate consultations with financial advisors. Kamara had begun protecting portions of her own exposure quietly before she formally left. When the sale froze, the entire structure stalled with it. Brennan was now legally exposed, carrying a $10 million asset he could not sell, refinance, or meaningfully leverage, while the recorded participation interest remained unresolved. Title insurers would not clear the property. Lenders would not touch it while active litigation remained attached to the chain. His liquid savings had been consumed gradually across months of legal filings, California counsel fees, escrow disputes, and ongoing carrying costs tied to the penthouse itself. He was asset-rich and cash-poor in the specific way that traps people. The number looks enormous on paper, while every actual bill continues arriving on time. Under the terms of their prenuptial agreement, Camara's premarital assets remained protected. Warwick said the agreement had been structured aggressively from the beginning. Separate accounts, separate investments, limited exposure clauses. She had entered the marriage with insulation already built around herself. She was leaving with that insulation intact. She did not lose what she came in with. She simply exited before Brennan's financial pressure spread any further into her life. Warwick told me Brennan's primary attorney had formally withdrawn 2 weeks earlier after multiple unpaid invoices. The mental incapacity challenge itself had not disappeared, but it had slowed significantly, delayed filings, missed deadlines, requests for extensions. Brennan was no longer moving through the system with momentum. He was reacting to it. I thanked Warwick and ended the call. Roselle was at the counter when I set the phone down. She turned and looked at me and waited. I read through the summary Warwick had emailed while we spoke. 2 pages, precise, everything documented. I folded it the way I had folded Evan's letter and set it on the table in front of me. Roselle asked me how I felt. I thought about it honestly. Not the answer I was supposed to give. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Not the particular vindication people expect when something collapses for someone who deserves it. I thought about what I actually felt. I feel like Evan was right about all of it, I said. Roselle nodded slowly. She turned back to the counter. That was enough. I sat there a while after that. I thought about Camara in that navy dress at the will reading, her hand finding Brennan's beneath the table when the penthouse number was read aloud. I thought about the garbage bags in the Eastover driveway. I thought about her message, the threat wrapped carefully inside concern, and the quiet tension I realized now had already started showing around the edges weeks earlier. The shorter replies, the calculated tone, the way she had begun sounding less like a wife protecting a future and more like someone evaluating risk. She had not lost. She had simply recognized the structure collapsing faster than Brennan did and stepped away before it buried her too. That was the most clarifying thing about her. The light outside Roselle's window had gone flat and gray by the time my phone lit up on the table. Brennan. I looked at the screen. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked it up and answered. He opened with sorry. Not the word alone, the full construction of it. He was sorry for how things went. Sorry for the timing. Sorry that the weeks after his father's passing had been so difficult for everyone. He said nobody was themselves during grief. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed until the rehearsal no longer shows. I said nothing. The silence did not unsettle him the way genuine silence unsettles people. He moved through it too smoothly, which told me he had prepared for it. He had expected me not to respond, and he had his next line ready before I had finished not speaking. He said he wanted to resolve this quietly, that there was a figure, a reasonable figure, he said that twice, that would make this clean for both of us. No more attorneys, no more filings. A private arrangement, handled quickly, done. He said he thought that was what his father would have wanted. A family matter kept inside the family. I noted that. The way he reached for Evan when he needed weight behind a sentence. His tone changed somewhere around the 4th minute. Not dramatically, just a thinning. The practiced warmth losing its surface tension the way ice loses thickness from underneath, before anything shows on top. What was underneath was not anger exactly. It was the specific frustration of a man who had expected a different conversation and was recalculating in real time. He said he hoped I understood what I was doing. He said it carefully, not as a threat, framed as concern. That was the most Kamara thing he had ever said to me, and I wondered briefly how long she had been the author of his better sentences. He kept talking. I let him. There is a particular kind of listening that is not passive. It is the listening of someone who is collecting rather than receiving, filing each sentence, each shift in tone, each moment where the performance slipped and something truer came through underneath. I had been married to a deliberate man for 41 years. I knew the difference between what a person was saying and what they meant. Brennan meant, I am running out of options, and I need you to make this easier for me. He finished. The line went quiet. I said 4 words. Call Warwick Slade's office. I ended the call. I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I set it down and looked at the time. 11 minutes. I counted it after. The way you confirm something you already sensed while it was happening. 11 minutes for him to offer me a reasonable figure with his father's name attached to it. 11 minutes to move from rehearsed apology to thinly veiled pressure. 11 minutes that told me everything I needed to know about where Brennan was and what he had left to work with. I slept without difficulty. Warwick called the following morning before 9. He said the court had issued its ruling on the mental incapacity challenge. Dismissed. The judge had reviewed Fletcher's 30 years of documentation, every company filing, every recorded title document, every deposit record, and found no evidentiary basis for the claim. Warwick had also submitted Evan's medical records from the final 3 years of his life. No cognitive decline of any kind. Not a notation. Not a flag. Nothing. The challenge had no ground when Brennan filed it. It had less now. Warwick paused. Then he said, Mrs. Dupree, we are ready to move to the next phase. The ruling came on a Thursday morning. Warwick read it to me over the phone. 2 paragraphs. Judicial language, stripped to its functional minimum. The mental incapacity challenge filed against Dupree Holdings, LLC, was dismissed with prejudice. That last part mattered. With prejudice meant it could not be refiled. It meant the door Brennan had tried to open was not just closed, it was sealed. Fletcher's documentation had done what Evan built it to do. 30 years of company filings, registered operating records, recorded participation agreements, deposit histories, and archived correspondence. All of it presented to the court in the precise order a man uses when he has been organizing evidence for a future he knew was coming. The California counsel Warwick retained had also confirmed the same thing the title companies already understood. Dupree Holdings did not own Brennan's Penthouse. It held a long-recorded participation interest tied to the Wilshire property structure itself, one that had followed the title chain for decades and required formal resolution before any transfer or refinancing could proceed. The judge found no ambiguity. Evan Dupree had not been a man in cognitive decline. He had been a man operating with extraordinary precision across 3 decades of deliberate financial architecture. The medical records confirmed it. 3 years of clean evaluations, no cognitive concerns, no clinical basis for the claim Brennan had staked everything on. The challenge had lasted just over 6 months. 6 months of filings, continuances, attorney invoices, title disputes. 6 months of Brennan trying to force open something Evan had sealed 30 years earlier. Warwick gave me a moment after he finished reading. Then he walked me through what Brennan's position looked like now, not with satisfaction, just with the clarity the situation required. The penthouse was worth $10 million on paper. In practice, it was worth nothing Brennan could access. He could not sell it. No buyer's title insurer would clear the unresolved participation interest attached to the property records. He could not refinance it. Lenders had already declined once the title review surfaced the dispute. And the pressure around him had started spreading beyond the penthouse itself. One of Brennan's remaining investment accounts had already been partially liquidated to cover ongoing legal costs and carrying expenses. Warwick said the buyer tied to the failed California transaction was still pursuing damages related to delayed closing costs and breach exposure. HOA assessments on the Wilshire property had also entered penalty status after multiple late payments over the previous 2 months. He could not simply hold the property indefinitely and wait. A luxury building on Wilshire Boulevard carried costs that continued regardless of whether the asset produced any income. Building fees, property taxes, insurance, maintenance assessments. Every month the penthouse sat unresolved. It consumed money he no longer had. His liquid savings were gone. Kamara was not there. His attorney was not there. He was in that penthouse alone with a $10 million view and no practical way to turn any of it into relief. I sat with all of that on a Thursday afternoon at Roselle's kitchen table and waited to feel what I expected to feel. It did not come. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even vindication. What came instead was quieter than that, a steadiness, the feeling of standing beside something built correctly and watching it hold under pressure exactly the way it was designed to hold. Not triumph. Recognition. Evan had built this. Not in the weeks before he died, across 35 years of Tuesday mornings and ordinary silences and documents signed without ceremony. He had built it the way he built everything, without announcement, without drama, with total confidence that the structure would stand when it needed to. It was standing. I looked out the window at Roselle's backyard. The afternoon light was flat and even, the kind of light that does not ask anything of you. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt the ache of missing Evan without the confusion that had been wrapped around it. My phone rang. Warwick. I answered. He said, "Mrs. Dupree, it is time to present your son with your terms." Warwick sent the offer to Brennan's new attorney on a Monday morning. He walked me through the figure the previous Friday. Sitting across from him in the Trade Street office for the 3rd time, the file between us thicker now than it had been at the beginning. He did not present the number apologetically or with ceremony. He simply showed me how it was built. 30 years of accumulated participation revenue tied to Dupree Holdings' recorded interest in the Wilshire property structure. Quarterly override distributions dating back to 1991. Documented legal costs from the North Carolina proceedings. California counsel fees for the title filings, escrow coordination, and lender responses after the sale froze. Administrative penalties already triggered by the failed transaction. Everything itemized, everything supported. Then he explained the final part. Brennan's buyer was no longer simply threatening action over the collapsed sale. Formal claims had already been initiated for delayed closing losses, carrying costs, and contractual breach exposure tied to the frozen transaction. Warwick made it clear those claims were Brennan's responsibility alone. But the pressure they created mattered because they narrowed his remaining options almost completely. He also told me one of the Penthouse Association notices had formally escalated into collection review after repeated late assessments tied to the property. Not foreclosure. Not yet. But enough to deepen the pressure surrounding him. The total was not $10 million. It was more. Not because anyone was inflating numbers. Because 6 months of unresolved litigation around a luxury California property had consequences that continued accumulating while the asset remained trapped in place. Warwick told me Brennan had 1 week to accept. If the week passed without a signed response, Warwick would proceed toward formal court-supervised resolution and forced settlement negotiations, a process that would extend the dispute for months, increase Brennan's exposure significantly, and place the property's entire financial structure under deeper review. The offer on the table was, in the most precise sense of the phrase, the best terms Brennan was going to see. I told Warwick to send it. I did not watch the clock after that. That was the thing about the week. I had expected to feel the waiting more than I did. I had expected to check my phone and count the days and sit with the particular tension of an unanswered question. Instead, the week moved through me quietly. The way weeks move when you have done everything you are able to do and the next thing is simply time. On Tuesday, I drove to the cemetery. I parked and walked to Evan's grave and stood there in the mid-morning quiet, with my hands at my sides. I did not speak aloud. There was nothing I needed to say that Evan did not already know. He had known it. I understood now, before I did. I stood there long enough to feel the ground beneath my feet and the air on my face, and the particular stillness of a place that does not ask anything of you. Then I walked back to the car. Thursday evening, Roselle made dinner, and we ate at her kitchen table the way we had eaten together across 50 years of friendship, without agenda, without performance. Two women sitting with food and the comfortable silence of people who do not need to fill every moment with something. She did not ask about the week. I did not explain it. Friday night, I slept 8 hours, without interruption. I noted it when I woke. The first full night of sleep I had managed since the funeral. Not because the situation was over. Because for the first time in months, my body no longer felt like it was bracing for impact. Saturday morning, I got up and made coffee. I took it to the kitchen table. I picked up the paper. Roselle kept a physical paper, had always kept one. And I read it the way Evan used to read it. Front to back, without rushing, with the quiet attention of someone who is present in the moment they are actually in. It felt like something returning. Sunday evening, I was in the sitting room when my phone lit up on the side table. Warwick. I looked at the screen for a moment. Outside, the light had gone and the street was quiet. The week was up. I answered. "Mrs. Dupree," he said. "Brennan's response has arrived. I arrived 20 minutes early." Warwick's assistant showed me in, and I took my seat and set my bag on the floor beside me and folded my hands on the table. The office was the same as it had always been. Files ordered, window looking out over Trade Street. The quiet of a room that has contained many difficult things and absorbed all of them without changing its character. I had dressed carefully that morning. Not for Brennan, for myself. I waited. He arrived 4 minutes after the hour. I heard him in the corridor before the door opened. Not his voice, just his footsteps. And the particular pause before a door handle turns that tells you the person on the other side is gathering something before they enter. He looked reduced, not collapsed, not broken in any visible way, just reduced. The specific diminishment of a man whose structure had been stripped down piece by piece over months. The pressed suit was still there. The jawline was still Evan's. But the certainty he used to carry into rooms, the expectation that things would eventually bend his direction, that was gone. He sat across from me without looking at me directly and placed his hands flat on the table and waited for Warwick to begin. Warwick moved the documents without ceremony. Settlement agreement, resolution of the recorded participation interest, structured payment terms, release language tied to the California property dispute and all related litigation. He explained each section briefly and indicated where Brennan needed to sign. Brennan signed. His pen moved across each page without pause, without the hesitation of a man searching for something left to challenge. That told me more than anything else could have. He had already fought every angle available to him and discovered the same thing each time. The structure held. The signing took less than 15 minutes. Nobody spoke beyond what the documents required. When the last page was finished, Warwick collected everything into a neat stack and set it aside. The room went quiet. Brennan stood first. He adjusted his jacket automatically, the way people reach for habits after control leaves them. Then he looked at me. Directly. For the first time since he entered the room. I looked back. His face held something I could not name precisely. Not anger, not remorse, something heavier than both. The look of a man realizing too late that the person he underestimated was never the vulnerable one in the room. Then he walked out. The door closed softly behind him. The room held its quiet. Warwick did not speak. He gave me the space the moment required, and I took it. Not long, just enough. Then I picked up my bag, thanked him, and walked out into the Charlotte afternoon. The drive home took 18 minutes. I did not go to Roselle's. I drove to Keswick Drive, the house that had always been in both my name and Evan's, the deed untouched, the title clean. Brennan had spent months focused on Los Angeles, on liquidity, on valuation, on the appearance of wealth. He never once thought to examine what had already been secure because he had mistaken visibility for value. He had always been looking at the wrong thing. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. And for the first time since the funeral, the quiet inside me no longer felt temporary. I thought about Evan. Not without ache. I understood now that grief does not disappear cleanly. It simply changes shape until you can carry it without it crushing your ribs every morning. But alongside the ache was something steadier: recognition. He had not stood behind me and pushed. He had built something ahead of me and trusted that one day I would walk toward it when I needed it most. I got out of the car. I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where I had sat for 40 years and took the passbook out of my bag and set it in front of me. I looked at it for a long moment. This small, worn thing Brennan had called trash, that Kamara barely glanced at, that had spent 35 years quietly carrying the architecture of everything Evan built. Then I put it away. I did not need to look at it anymore. I finally understood what it was saying.